Hello everyone and welcome back. It's Dwiz and I'm very happy to have you back around here for the, second stream of our game dev, which we're doing today. And, last time we mainly focused on our general structure of generating the world and so on. Today we actually want to get some textures in. So let's just have a look at what we did last time. And basically then of course we would also like to add some height to the map as it's still flat. And another thing I noticed is that our Y is basically the wrong way for our mouse. So let's head on over to our camera, it should be, I guess. No, then it's in the input manager. Yes, here we go. And here we're just doing the reversed, but we don't want that. We actually want it to be exactly the same as we have it for our X value. Just like that. And then we shouldn't, you can't really experience that or see that, of course, but of course I can tell you that it should be working now. Let's have a look first though. Okay, so now if I move the mouse up or further away from me, it goes up, and if I pull the mouse towards me, we look down. Okay, so that's pretty neat. We could also already turn off these debug lines, but I think they might be coming in handy later on. So let's just leave those. And another thing that I forgot yesterday evening when we were done to actually commit all of this stuff. So let's have a look at that and do that before we continue. We don't want all of these, but we want these. Yeah, that should be it. And then let's say first stream ended. Flat world. That should be fine for me. And then let's just go ahead and push that. Nice. Okay, and then, normally we should of course do a branch here, but as we're coding for ourselves, it doesn't matter too much. We can just stay on the main branch and go back to our earlier commits if anything goes wrong. Then of course we need somewhere to store our textures, and I would love to do that in a folder here called textures. Rename that textures. And then I have prepared a few textures for us. Let's have a look at those. Where are they? So basically I just made a texturing folder, and in here we have all the PNGs. They aren't perfect, but it's gonna be fine for now, I guess. We don't have the textures folder in here yet. That's interesting. So then let's just copy that straight to here. Yes, I'm sure, thanks. Very good. Or should have been, let me have a look at something here real quick. Should have been the JPEG, I'm not too sure right now. Let me check on my last projects real quick. But I think it doesn't really matter actually. I think you can do whatever you want. Textures, where are they? There they are. No, we also did PNGs, so that should in theory be fine. So in order to load them, we're probably gonna want a texture manager, texture loader, something like that. So let's start off by creating a texture. What do we want to call it? Let's just call it utils, as it's utilities. Stupid me. Of course, we start with the .h, and there we have our classic pragma ones. And then we have include. Yeah, I think we're gonna need some strings. Glad is gonna be fine. I think we need this map thing. And let's go with vector, and that's gonna be it for now. Of course, we'll also need some terrain types to be implemented, but we're gonna deal with that in a second. So probably texture utils should know about the terrain types, but let's just start with one of these gluent. Well, first of all, let's do load texture, and then let's do gluent create a terrain texture array. Texture array. And there we have the texture paths. That's probably not a bad idea, but we could also just go with a vector of these gluents. And then we can do the texture layers. And of course, we're going to have an text width as well as a text height. Perfect. So then let's actually use a string instead here. And let's move that to a new window. Really great also that it keeps track of what we were talking about last time. Really like that a lot. Okay, then let's just do a constant string instead, please. Std string path. We don't need this right now. Okay, and then let's add the texture utils.cpp. Okay, great. Well, first of all, of course, we want to include our texture utils.h. Then we're once again gonna need that vector. And, well, the array as well, as we want to create an array. And then we are gonna do this weird stuff. We're gonna define the stb image implementation and include the stb image.h. And this one's basically this one. And, well, tells you to do this, if you wondered, just to make it run properly. Okay, so we got our two functions that we need to implement. That's interesting. Let's start off a little slower. Let's start with the header of that real quick, load texture. And then we want the constant string, that's correct. And then let's see, I think that's not the way I want to handle that. I would like to have a width, a height, and, well, what was that again? Layer, I don't know. Doesn't really matter here. We just need it in order to get this unsigned char of data that is gonna be loading in, or gonna be filled from the stbi load function. So we're gonna have the path, we're gonna pass the path as a C string, we're gonna pass the references to W, H, and N, and we're gonna get a 0, I don't even know for what's that, rec comp, whatever that is, and N is comp. I think that's just the number of how many, I don't know. Let's just make sure that our data is existent. And then let's go with a return 0 if that ever isn't filled. And then let's create our text or texture. Gluent tags. And then we want to go with the glgen textures. Like that. And then we're going to bind that texture, of course. And we're going to, well, basically, I don't know what it does, this function, but we need to do it. Then we're going to generate a mipmap, as far as I'm concerned. Generate mipmap with our GL texture 2D. And then we're going to do these parameters. This one is texture 2D rep s, not bad. Although it might be irrelevant. I don't know whether the order is relevant or not here. Texture rep s and GL repeat. Then we're going to do the same for T. Great. And we got then the minimum filter and the mag filter. That should be fine. And then we have our data and we can return our tags. And in theory, this should yield us a texture. And then the next one is going to be to create the texture array. So create terrain texture array. That sounds reasonable. And I also think that that's the way we did it here. Let's check. Yes, perfect. Then let's check that again. First of all, let's remove all of that. We want to have a number of layers. That's good. Then we're gonna do the texture array. But I think it's basically, let's make sure that we know texture array ID maybe. So we know it's an ID. Then we're gonna generate the textures. Then we're gonna bind these textures and we're gonna text image 3D, that thing. That's great. Let's check all of the inputs here real quick though. We've got the GL texture 2D array, fine, 0, fine, GL RGBA, fine, but I want that to be 8. Then we have text width, text height, num layers, 0, GL RGBA, and then we got the GL unsigned byte and the null pointer. That's fine. So that's great. And then we are going to need to do these GL text parameters again. And it's going to be the parameter I thing. And then we want to do the, well, min filter and the mipmap. Great. Mag filter, and then rep s and rep t. Great. And then let's go through these layers. Perfect. And then let's go ahead and do Gluent texture ID is texture layers I. Perfect. And then let's do GL bind texture. Texture ID. Perfect. And then let's go with our vector of unsigned chars, the data. That's correct. Yeah, but it's actually, let's not call that data here anymore. Let's call that pixels. And then with that out of the way, we can generate the texture image. GL gen text image. Why can't I do singular here? GL text. It's get text image, sorry. And then why aren't you happy with this? Because we do need way more inputs. Okay, in order to GL get text image, we need the GL texture 2D, 0, GL RGBA, GL unsigned byte, and the pixels data. Perfect. Then, of course, we want to do them as sub-images. So let's do that here. That should be also fine. Yes, looks pretty good. Then we're done with this for loop and can just generate the bitmap and bind the texture. And then, of course, we're gonna return our texture array ID. Great. So with that done, we should, in theory at least, be able to load these textures. Let's do that somewhere in the beginning of our program. Let's think about that though. Maybe in our terrain, in our world manager, that could make sense. Or straight away in the world. Or should we just put it in the simple shader? That could also work. But I think the best thing is gonna be to put it in the application probably, right? Either application or, well, we could also go with world. That would be also neat. Let me see. Yeah, I think we're just gonna go with the world, right? Yeah, I think world is gonna be a good spot for that. And then in the constructor of our world, we're gonna, well, before we create the world, let's add our terrain, I think. So terrain textures. And then we're gonna need our terrain type in a second, and that's gonna equal load texture assets. Nope, that's not correct. What did we call that? Textures, I think. Slash, and then let's just start with, I don't know, grass. Grass underscore 01. And minor e. And then of course we need our terrain type. So let's create an enum real quick. Terrain type.h. Can't really type that well today. I don't know what's going on with that. And that should just be the, well, classic pragma once. And then enum class terrain type. Then we're gonna have grass, sand, yeah, let's go with sand, let's go with stone, let's go with dirt, and then let's go with air. We're not gonna deal with stuff like water like this. Water is gonna be handled differently, I think. Okay, what's your problem with those? Okay, perfect. Then in our world, we can simply say that we want to use that. So let's say here, this is gonna be terrain grass. And of course, we need to define terrain textures somewhere, right? So let's probably do that in world, I guess. And world.h. So let's add, that's going to be the map that we were talking about, std map terrain type fluent terrain textures. What's wrong with that? Standard map terrain type fluent terrain textures. We didn't include it here. Sorry. And the terrain type, yes. And then in the world.cpp, we're going to need to include the texture utils. And of course, I'm stupid, this should be terrain type, like that. Why don't you find grass? Terrain type. I see grass here. Ah. Caps lock, okay. And then we can just go ahead and copy that for all of our 4 textures that we have for now. Then we can do sand, stone, and dirt. Did we have a typo there? Let's make all of them all capital letters. So then that should be fine, and then of course we need to change the paths here real quick. Great. And then we have our textures already prepared, I would say. We can just, well, basically push them back, of course. So that's what we're going to do next. And then we're going to have to work a lot on our shader. So let's do our vector of texture layers and then push back grass, sand, stone, and dirt. Great. And then, of course, we can create that texture array down here. So let's say our terrain textures texture array ID equals create terrain texture ID, and then I think I chose 400 by 400, 400 here. And then of course we don't have the terrain texture ID, terrain texture array ID, sorry. So let's head back into world here, have a look. Terrain texture ID should just be a gluent terrain texture array ID. Perfect. So that's basically the ID for our terrain texture array. Great. Then next up, we should basically start working on our shader, I think. What do we have here? That's fine. Okay. So let's have a look at that. Our shader, simple shader. We definitely want that to, well, basically we need to add these mats that we added as we, well, sorry, in world, we're pushing back those texture layers. We need to deal with that, of course. So those are probably going to be uniforms, I think. But let's just see if we go into our fragment shader. Where is it? Shaders, fragment. It's currently still quite empty, but that's fine. We're only outputting our fragment color and we're only getting in our input color, basically. So what we definitely want to change then is, of course, that we need to get in a texture chord. So let's do in vec2 text chord. And then we want to have this uniform for the color for now. And then we want to have the uniform sampler 2D as an array. And that's going to be our terrain textures. If you ever do something like that, make sure that all of your, well, especially these names back here of the uniforms and so on, they need to match the names that you use while pushing back, basically. So let's say terrain textures. Let's keep that, and then of course we're gonna have our one uniform sampler. Nope, that's not important. We just need our uniform for our tool, whether we use texture. And then, well, all of the light stuff and so on we can ignore for now. So let's just go ahead and say we have our VEC3 base color. Do we need that here? Yes, VEC3 base color. So we can now differentiate whether we use the texture or not. So if use texture, then please do the int layer equals int terrain type ID, which we don't hand over yet. That's something we need. And then we're just going to need an offset so it's really working. So let's actually add the, well, I think we need that as a flatten float, right? Yeah, let's just do it here. Flat in float terrain type ID. Perfect. Then we can use that down here. That's great. And if we don't want to use a texture, then of course we're just gonna say our base color is equal to our, well, how's the color called again? Just color, right? That's not gonna work out really well, I think. I think we need the color.rgb. We just need the, because if we use this VEC4 as a color here, this color is going to be only the RGB and then not the alpha value, basically. So that's great. Then we don't want to deal with something like ambient or specular components or anything like that. So how can we do that? I think we can just do the frag color is our base color then. But we're definitely gonna work more on that later on. Maybe not today, but at some point we definitely need to do that. Let's just leave it as is for now and check the vertex shader. Definitely need to change some stuff in there as well. So first of all, did we put that to out? No, we only have out VEC4. We also need the out VEC2 text chord. So we just want to pass that to our fragment, from our fragment shader to our vertex shader. And the reason for that is basically that we just need it in the vertex shader and we can just pass stuff to the fragment shader, as far as I'm concerned at least. Then in the vertex shader, as already said, we're just gonna want our layout location equals 1, and then we want the in vec to a text chord. Yeah, it doesn't need to be the same name here, because here it's basically working from these locations. So the first thing that's going to come in is going to be treated as a vec3, and it's going to be called a pulse. And then this is going to be a text chord. And well, then of course we also need our terrain type ID, right? Yeah, I think so. Let's just call it a type ID. Perfect. And then we have some outs. We have our vec2. Did I just say that we want to pass the terrain thing to the fragment shader? Of course not. We're getting that in there. It's the other way around. Sorry for that. So out vec2 text chord. That's going to be passed to the fragment shader. And then we have our input flat in float terrain type ID. Great. Then, well, we have the model view and the projection matrix. That's great. And then in the main, let's just do, well, first of all, do we want our world paths and all of that? Nope, I don't think so. We're just gonna do terrain type ID is gonna be our A type ID. And then our position is gonna be projection view model and our A powers. Yeah, I think that's fine. But we could also just do the right way, I guess. Do we need to have the position in the fragment shader? That's a great question. Don't really need it, right? Just need the position, the texture chords. I think so at least. And then, well, in the cells, of course, we need to define the terrain types. But one cell is always going to have an array of terrain types, so we can have, well, basically a Y value. So it's 3D and not 2D. So in order to do that, probably we should first of all head into cell.h, get some variables up and running. For example, of course, we need a height value. Then we're definitely gonna need our terrain type. But that should be a vector. What did I do here? Let me have a look. Nope, we're not gonna do it this way. We're just gonna do this as a standard vector, and that's gonna be terrain types. Okay, fine, then we have that, it should be fine. And then of course we need to change our constructor. Oh, well, we should include that probably. Like that, and then we should include our terrain type array here. So let's do std vector terrain type. And then let's just call that types. Okay, great. Then let's go back to cell.cpp and implement that. So first of all, of course, we're gonna need to do the same thing here. Okay, so then that should already pass that. Zero problem here. Cell std vector. Ah, well, I forgot I don't know how that's called in English, the and symbol basically. And then, well, we draw here, that's great. And, well, where we draw, we should basically, well, we definitely need to change our chunk as well, as our chunk has this lovely add quad method, which we're gonna need to work on. So let's do that now, because no need to deal with the cell if chunk isn't ready, I guess. So let's have a look. We definitely need those texture coordinates, and they are gonna be here, I think. So let's do it like this, T0 of course as well. And then let's just continue with that. And then we have all of our 4 texture coordinates for the 4 vertices positions. Great. So basically, Then of course we need to also push back the textures. So this is just gonna be vertices dot pushback t0x t0y. Yeah, we don't do that. Textures should at least be just a vec2. Okay, great. Then let's copy this and actually also add the terrain type here as an argument. And then we can just go ahead and copy that and put that in chunk.h. So the function matches. Where is it? Add quad, there we go. Let's do this instead, please. And then let's do little cleaner, perfect. Okay, then we push back all of these here, so we don't need y as I said, although, yeah, well, that's the y here. And then we just need to do that for all of these. T1x, T1y, perfect. T2x, T2y, perfect. T3, perfect. Okay, so then we have all of the textures, and of course we also need to push back the type. So let's do vertices pushback type, and then, well, we can just copy that, I think. Big question is, what's his problem now with this pushback? Do we need to set this terrain type somewhere? Where did we do that? That's probably in... Is it in shader? Set methods? Yeah. But I don't think that we need to do that there. We can just pass it as an int, right? Do we have simple shader set int? Yes, we do. So that should be it. And type, do we need to maybe just do the type ID instead? That would be a good idea, I think. Let's do type ID, then it's an int and not a terrain type. And then of course we need to define type ID. So let's say float, basically float, not an int. And then we're just gonna static cast the terrain type. Perfect. Then that should be all fine. And well, we got our triangles and the line indices. Okay, so in theory, that should already work. Well, here, of course, for now, we're just gonna set everything to be terrain type grass, I think. And then we're gonna pass X and Z. Great. What are you missing? cell.cpp. Well, here we definitely have an issue. We definitely need our textures here. We're gonna fix that in a second, but that's not it, I think. That's new cell. So that's cell. And there we have the types. Well, of course, that needs to be an array and not a singular type, right? So I think we could just go ahead and just call this, right? Or is it these? Not quite sure. Can't we just do a thing like that?
No, unfortunately not. Okay, then let's just create that terrain type array in a function, and let's just call that terrain stack or terrain type stack. And then let's say auto terrain type stack equals, well, should we do that here or in the world manager? Let's do it in the world manager. Get terrain type stack. Okay, great. We don't have the world manager here, so let's just include that. And well, then we also need to pass that here, I think. Like that. Why is it undefined? Let's just go to world manager, nope, to chunk.h. Then we should have an issue here, why don't we? This should be world manager, great, and then of course we need to include it here as well. What's wrong with you? So we don't need world manager, we only need world in order to include world manager. That's kind of shady, but I don't care. Okay, so with this world manager, we can then do the, in here, that should work. To incomplete type. Ah, because we have this forward declaration here. Then let's not do chunk.h. Let's not include world here, please. Let's just include world manager. Or do we need a forward declaration here as well? I don't think so. But we don't have our chunk. That, well, cell is also going to be need to have. But why is that not working? Let's just say you also just keep a static reference to this. Not static, but you keep a reference. And then world manager.h. Ah, that's bummer. Messed that up. Little typo. Caused a lot of trouble. And in world manager, we don't have anything yet. And neither in world manager.h. Yeah, didn't work on that yesterday. So let's get started on that. So first of all, of course, we want to, well, basically pragma once as always. Then we want to include vector as well as terrain type. And we want to include the world. Great. And then we have a forward declaration of our world. And then we're just going to do our world manager and wow. Let's see, we don't want that, we don't want that, we don't want that. what's going on here. Let's just get rid of all of that. And then let's say we want to get this terrain stack. So get terrain type stack, and basically that's it, but we need to include, of course, some arguments. Let's do our chunk position as well as our local position. And then of course we need to put an int here as well. And after the local z, nope, that's all. Okay, so then it would also be great to have a reference to our world. So let's do a private, nope, let's just do world. Because these terrain type stacks are, of course, on a cell level, not on a world manager level. And well, let's just do the null pointer there just to make sure, and then let's go to worldmanager.cpp and really get started with that. So first of all, I would like to have, of course, the includes, but basically an empty constructor. That's what I wanted to say. World manager.h. Then, well, we don't need any of the more advanced stuff for now. Let's just go with the constructor. But that's gonna be empty, please. And then we are just gonna do this void. Nope, not void, but this is gonna be the get terrain type stack, like that. Great. What's your problem with that? Ah, well, because we don't have them in the tasks yet, I guess. Ah, world manager is already there. We have the world manager. We have the world manager H. We have the world. Got the texture utils? Nope. Let's add those. Did we add anything else that is new? I don't think so. Okay, great. And then let's go back to chunk. Don't we have a cells in chunk? Don't have cells in chunk. That's bad. Ah, we do. There it is. Okay. Ah, okay, so that's fixed. Where was that other error? Get terrain type stack. Okay, and then there, of course, we want to do world X, world Z, and then the local coordinates gonna come from the cell. So why don't we just pass the cell? Cells. I'm stupid. We of course want to do that in this for loop here, right? Here, okay. And then we do, wait a second. Yeah, well, we can just do X and Z. And what else did it want? Terrain type. Chunk X, chunk Z, local X, local Z. Yeah, well, we need to do this constant, right? And what's about this world X, world Z? Ah, capital X and Z. Okay, so in theory, let's think that through. We call this method getTerrainTypeStack. Why is this constant causing a problem now? Didn't we do this as a constant? Probably not. Okay, so basically we call the world manager or its function getTerrainTypeStack, get it the coordinates, and the getTerrainTypeStack will give that back to us. For now, we are just gonna do wait a second, getTerrainTypeStack. Why do we push back all of that? Let's just do only grass, right? Ah, no, we need to push those back, but returning is... How does it work again? getTerrainTypeStack is this just to get the stack of textures, I think. But what we want to do is basically get the cell terrain stack, right? But that's the just another name, I would say. Okay, then let's see. How did we create that here? Was that all created? Probably. Okay, let's say we want that vector, or let's just shorten that and call it stack. And then let's say we have a height. Let's just go with a fixed 10 here. Then we're going to do terrain type air. So everything's air in the beginning. And then we're just going to fill that up with, well, basically, let's just do dirt everywhere. And then we can just do for int I less than 10. Because we have the 10 here, then let's actually get a variable in world manager, and let's just say that's gonna be chunk height equals 10. And then that should be, of course, an int. And then in world manager.cpp we can use that chunk height here and there. Is there a problem here? Ah, well, messed that up, fine. So let's not say everything's air for now. Let's just go ahead and say all of the stack. Ah, well, let's do an if statement here first. If I is equal to chunk height -1, of course, then the stack is going to be grass, and else it's going to be dirt. What's the issue with the semicolon? Ah, behind that? No. Huh? Am I stupid? Where are we missing this semicolon? And in the end, of course, we're just gonna return the stack, but what's going on there? Ah,
I'm stupid. I left the condition in. Yeah, sure. That's just straight away stupid. Left that in there. Okay, so now our world manager tells every cell that it's, well, basically its terrain type is grass for the top block and dirt for the rest. So in theory, most of our things should be sorted. Let's check the cell though. Well, while we add the quads, we of course need to add the texture coordinates as well. So let's quickly do that. We want to add quad position, and then we also want to do texture, I guess. Or let's just call it text chords. And then we're just gonna pass the whole stack. No, for the terrain types array, we're gonna pass where we are at right now, and that should be the height. But we don't calculate that in here yet, right? No, the height is completely irrelevant here. We just want chunk. Well, we don't have the chunk height here, but we have a reference to the chunk, right? Cell, do you have a chunk reference? Nope. Let's just quickly do that. Chunk. Okay. And then let's just let's go back to the chunk, and where we do the cells, let's just do cells chunk this. Okay, perfect. And then in the cell again, we can use the chunk dot chunk height. Did we do that private? We have this height here, but we wanted to do that in World Manager. Does the chunk have a reference to World Manager? Yeah, then let's just do in cell. We should just be able to do chunk World Manager and then get terrain type stack. Nope, not get terrain type stack. Get the height, chunk height, like that. Do you want that or what? Doesn't. Is inaccessible because it's private, right? Then let's just change that. I don't mind. And then this should finally be fine. Of course, we don't have these text chords yet. Definitely need to get those sorted. But I think those are pretty simple to do. We could just go ahead and go and do GLM back to text chords 4. That sounds reasonable. 0, 0, 1, 0. 1, 1, 0, 1. If we start in the lower left of the quad, then that's going to be counterclockwise. Unfortunately, I don't have the beautiful image that we draw yesterday together, but that doesn't matter too much. We now have our text chords and they are already set. That's great. And then I think we can just add those. Yeah, that should be fine. Or we could, of course, also just put these
instead of these here, of course. Doesn't really matter. It should be fine now. 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1 should be the way to go. And where's your problem now? Type, how do we call that in here? Terrain types? Where's cell.h? Terrain types, yeah. So that should be fine. Why are you complaining here? Why do we need a default constructor for class chunk? Let's just fix it with Copilot. What's the matter here? Okay, so we should define a chunk default constructor. And I think we can just do that in the chunk CPP, of course, but that actually shouldn't be a thing because we have our constructor here and that should be working. Like we have our X, Z and our world manager. Got X, Y, matter and our world manager. Let's just compile it and see whether they are consistent. And then just pass that to our little helper. Ah, that's the issue, I guess. Because we don't define it anywhere, right? If we have this reference, it needs to be defined somewhere. Do we need to have this reference? We could also, instead of using that, no, we need the reference to our world manager. So we need that basically. Or how could we do that in a different fashion? So basically we only need the chunk here, but there we get it already, so that's fine. So we get it passed as an argument, so that's fine. Could just say, no, we set the chunk afterwards. And that should also be fine. Well, but probably that's the issue, right? Let's just do cell as a default constructor here, because the but I want the load. No, we can just do this. That we do this as a constant. Then we have our types, our int x and int. Let's just call them local. Nope. Let's stick with local. And then we're just gonna do types, and so on. Let's do that in the next line though. have the types, and then we can just get rid of this and do this as a default constructor. Types, then we have local x. Okay, and then we could always just pass the chunk to our draw call, right? I think that's a good idea. So we don't need that reference, we don't have that problem. So let's see. Standard vector terrain types should be fine. Okay, let's not worry about that. That's the chunk thing that we already removed. This could be fine also now. We'll need to have a look at that in a second again, and then draw. We get the chunk, so we don't even need it. I don't know what I was thinking about. And then in the world manager, where was that error? Where is it? There. In a new chunk, what do we need? Chunk. We need the world manager. Okay, let's go through all of these and try and fix the issues. Give me a second here. What's that? X and Z and the world manager. World manager. Ah ha ha, I know it. Perfect. Then that should work, right? Let's just compile that to make sure that all of the old errors get removed. Okay, and then let's have a look at those errors. So first of all, we got this, that the class cell has no member named chunk in 24 of chunk CPP. 24 of chunk CPP. Yeah, we wanted to have the chunk not as a member anymore. So let's just do that. That should be fine. Then we had some other issues. Does not have any field name types. Cell has a field name types. I'm pretty sure about that. But maybe it's terrain types, of course. It needs to be terrain types here as well, right? Then this is what we already did. So let's hope it just works now. Nope, of course not. Still have some issues here going on. Let's fix those real quick. We have the terrain types. That sells CPP 3040. Chunk, and then the chunk, I think it has a pointer to World Manager. Thought so. Let's fix that. I don't want to think about that too long. And that's the beauty of programming today. You should use the dot operator, which we had before. Thanks. And then we have an incomplete type here. Do we need to include that or forward declarate that or something? Well. I think we can just include it here. One errorless. It finished, that's great. Where did it go? Okay, we got some issues here. Vertex shader compilation fails. Let's just pass that to our friend. So we don't have to think about shader language too much. And hope that it's gonna get that done. So let's see. What do we have here? I think I didn't remove one of the things I did wrong in the beginning. So in our vertex shader, we still have our flat infloat terrain type ID. That shouldn't be there. And nope, I think it's different, right? I'm just gonna compare it with an old shader that I have laying around. So vertex, first of all, has the position, then the text coord, and then the type ID. That should be right. Then we have our out vec2. That's of course not an input here. It's gonna be an output here though, right? Nope, that's, wait a second. Let me just ask. I didn't want to get all of it explained. Stop. vertex and fragment shaders again. So that's correct. And then it passes that to the fragment shader. So basically, we have this text chord that we need to push, but we also need to push the flatten float here. So we need to output that flatten float somehow. So let's say we want to do out the frag position as well. I don't know. I have the GL position right now. We don't pass that anywhere, so that's also not very good. Let's just say we have our text chords as well as our flat out flat terrain type ID. Then we have our uniforms, and then we're just gonna do terrain type ID is a type ID. Perfect. And our text chord, or the GL position, we don't even put that out. Should we though? No, I think that's for internal vertex use. And then do we need the frag position? I don't think so. But what we definitely need is to push the text chord. So let's also do that with a lowercase t here. Text chord equals to a text chord. Don't forget the semicolons. And that should be fine again. Then let's check the fragment shader again. So we have our... Why don't we start with the outs? Ah, well, that's the out, yeah. Okay, then we have our text chord as well as our terrain type ID. That's correct. Then we have a uniform color as well as the sampler2D array terrain textures. And then we have the uniform bool use texture. That's also correct. Then we don't need any of these fancy things that I have there. And then that should be fine. We have our base color that we define, and if we have a texture, wait a second. Here we also need to define base color if we have a texture equals texture, and then do the terrain textures, then do the basically what we want to do here is extract the texture color. Can you say that like that? Well, basically the color on that specific spot, as far as I'm understanding that. Could be wrong. Okay, thing is, we don't have that layer. Yeah, we use that layer. Perfect. Then everything should be fine in theory. So let's just run that again and hope that we get compiled shaders now. No, I'm not at all a Factorio dev. Big misunderstanding, Roberto. I would love to do that, of course, but definitely not. Just played a lot of Factorio as well as a lot of other factory games, but Factorio definitely one of my favorites, and that's also why we have quite a few videos on the channel about that. Okay, we still have some shader errors. Vertex shader compilation failed. Unexpected identifier expecting double at token terrain type ID. Yeah, exactly. Factory game dev. I want to do my own factory game, not doing
not doing Factorio. Would be great though. Such a lovely game. But of course, this is gonna be... Ah, damn. This is gonna be 3D instead. And, well, there's a lot of challenges that come with that, of course. Copy that once more. Okay, let's see our vertex shader compared to what he tells us. So we have the vec3 position, that a text coord, a type ID, that's fine, text coord, flat out flat. Ah. What do we do in here? Flat in float. Flat out float. Typo. Try again. But really nice to have you back, Roberto. It's a pleasure. Okay, so fragment is... so the vertex compiled successfully now. That's great news. The fragment shader didn't. Assignment of incompatible types. Let's check that again with our friend. Okay, didn't know that. So apparently you don't use flat with floats. Couldn't we then just do int? Let's just try flat, gone, flat, gone. Or did he see something else that was wrong? So basically it didn't work what he told us to do. Same error. So let's do the flat in, flat out again, because that's not the solution. That didn't change anything. I know that it works with flat. You see any other typos? Okay, so basically what we should check is we have two outputs. Do we output them? We have text coord here and we have terrain type ID here. So that should be fine. And then in here we have the terrain type ID again and the text coord. And then we have the frag color going out and we have our three uniforms. You know what? Do we ever say use texture? So do we ever set that back? I don't think so. Yeah, let's just try this last piece of advice that he gave us. There we go. Still not working. Well, let's get that in as an int. And well, then hopefully that works. Where do we set that? Okay, come on now. So, got this error message, and I'm also gonna give you the fragment shader, and I'm gonna give you the simple shader. Then where do we call all of that? Call that from within chunk, right? But we don't set the, we push it back, yeah. Push back the type ID. But we never push back use texture, right? Okay, let's go back to world draw real quick. There we should also set well, we draw our chunks there, but we should also set the terrain textures. Right? I think so. Definitely need to, oh well, we do the shader program in here, but we never do shader dot set int terrain textures, right? So let's do that in world then. I think that makes sense at least. So then let's do the GL active texture, texture 0, bind the texture array. Sounds great. And then let's say shader program not .use, but instead dot set int and do the texture array, and then tell it to use the texture array or where to get the texture array. Sorry. Because of course now what we would ideally do is pass our new simple shader program, or let's just call it shader then. And then world.h, gonna change that. Include that. Great, then this should be done. And then here we're just gonna put the ID. And in the chunks.draw we might even change that to, yeah, I think so. So
chunk H, draw. Let's do that as simple shader. And in chunk.cpp, draw. This is also gonna be a simple shader, and this is gonna be shader. And in this case, shader.id. Okay, then where do we call world draw again? In application. And then we just want to pass the shader. Maybe that was the big error. Nope. Still got some compile errors here, and now not even while running, but while building. So that's worse. Okay. In chunk H we don't have simple shader, so let's change that. What else was there? In world, simple shader in world.h and in world.cpp. Thought we did it there. Nope. Okay. And in world.h, there we have the simple shader. That was fake news. Chunk, draw, simple shader. Chunk, draw, simple shader. And we also include it here. So let's just try again. Maybe those are just old because chunk didn't compile or world didn't compile and then chunk didn't compile, whatever. Okay. Let's just rerun that real quick. And why does it close down instantly? That's also a good question. So still got that window half open. Okay, so we still have those fragment shader compilation errors. What could it be? Actually, did you say anything to that? Okay, help me out here. Okay, so the type mismatch wasn't as he told us with this flat out terrain type ID, but instead with, where was that? With the frag color. Because the base color is just 3 numbers, and the frag color of course also needs to have an alpha. So probably that's gonna work now. Okay, they compile, that's great, but our window doesn't show up. That's weird. That's some weird stuff. Okay, so let's set up some more debug statements then, I think. Okay, thanks. Thanks, that worked to resolve that issue. But nothing gets drawn to the screen. Only white. What could it be? I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the shaders that we just changed, but I don't know. Yeah, that should all be fine. Let's just add more debug statements then. So in here we don't, of course, don't need any of those, but in application.run we have all of those, and then let's just do one here. Let's, how do we want to call that? World generated sounds great. Camera initialized sounds great. Yeah, we don't need another one there. Okay, and in here, let's check that again with the use of the shader program. So basically what we want here is, of course, that it sets the model, the projection, but I'm thinking about whether it should also set the, what's that called again, the thing there. Also have this error statement. If we would have an OpenGL error, it should tell us that. Let's just check again with the run, and maybe, why don't we get any output there? The vertex shader, that's quite in the beginning, right? So we start to load that, and then here we do the simple shader. And doesn't that, yeah, basically the constructor of simple shader then loads the shaders, says that it compiled successfully. Hello? Ah, well, that's the, not the one that I wanted. And says that that was successful, and says that that was successful. And then as soon as we go out of the constructor again, we start with world and so on. So let's just say, when everything's done, let's say shader initialized. And in this world, generate meshes. Do we any draw calls there already? No, right? We do chunks.generate meshes. And we do the cells draw, but the cell draw doesn't draw anything. It just adds these quads. So that should be fine. And then the chunk has these quads added to itself. So that's great. And in cell, where we add the quad, we also add the terrain type as well as the text quads everywhere. That should be fine as well. Let's just try again whether we get the shader initialized debug line that we just added. Shader initialized, okay. And then let's just say in the application. So the world is not getting generated. So let's go into the definition of that. And let's just say let's instead say initialize world, or initializing. Let's start that with capital I and then include IO stream. Then let's say loaded all textures or something like that. Textures loaded. Then let's say texture layers pushed back. Texture array created. And chunks created. Sounds great. Do we need to initialize the chunk somewhere? Because we just do the null pointer here. Is that an issue maybe? If we go back to world. Could that be a thing? So basically that's the constructor. Yeah, we should do new chunk here, I guess. And then let's just try again. That might have been it. Still not it. Initializing a world was the last thing that got put to the screen. So let's go to the load texture function. Maybe, where is the load texture function? Of course here. That might be a thing if there's no data. And then let's include IO again. That might be the thing. That might be the thing. Let's check the paths real quick. They are in world, right? Textures. Textures. grass01.png. Should be fine as I'm concerned. Could also just add that statement for each and every one of those. So maybe we can actually get some insights where it's not working. Okay, so the first texture gets loaded, the second doesn't. But it also doesn't say that it's crashed or anything. So that's sand_1.png. Should also be fine. Textures, sand. But there is some kind of... No, the difference in length is just because of the difference here. Okay, then let's go back here and see. Okay. So what we also could just do is print out the data. Or the size, that's fine. If it's not 0, that's going to be fine. With size W, with, that's the path, the width, the height. Still don't know what that N is for, forgot that. Okay, so it says that that gets loaded, so there is data. And then in here we have something, some issue, I think. I think it's not like that. It should be different. It's a little stupidly complicated, but this should be something like this. N equals 4 means GL RGBA. If not, GL RGB. And we have the width, the height, and the same thing again. And equals. Basically, that's for the stack size that we have, I think. And then we do the same thing. GL RGB RGBA or RGB or GL RGB. Right. Then we have this GL unsigned byte. Ah, no, there's this 0 in between. Sorry. And then we have the data. So, should work, but shouldn't have worked before, of course, if we want... Ah, has some errors again. Permission denied. Ah, because probably we still had that open. Permission denied is always when you still have something open, actually. And we got the segmentation fault again. No. But we got all the textures loaded, we got the texture layers pushed back, and we got the texture array created. So we're way, way further. Let's go back to application. And nope, in simple shader we need to go, right? Nope. In world I think we were. Texture array created, but it didn't say the chunk created. So that was definitely a problem. That should be fine though. And then we go from X to world size, so from 0 to 9 basically, from 0 to 9. Then we loop through these. Did we set up chunk as a world.h chunks? Yeah, it should be fine. Yeah, then let's just go into the chunk constructor and say constructing chunks or something like that. Initializing chunk. And then in cell let's just do std. Nope. Cell array initialized, and then in here cell created. Now let's see whether that might be an issue. Could be a thing. Did I mess that up again? Or was it this segment? No, it was the segmentation fault now, not the permission denied. But let's first of all check where we get cell array initialized. That's great, but we don't get to... Okay, Okay, so probably here is the issue somehow. We don't have terrain type included here. That's also a little sus. And then let's see whether we have all of the things included. So new things, world manager, we do have that. World, we do have that. We have the texture utils, we have the terrain. Ah, that's it. Don't have the terrain type, right? But basically, no, we don't include that, yeah. So let's do that. There's no shader utils. And let's do terrain type.h. I should have put an I there, right? Includes always with I think. And it's a header, so it should be an include. That wasn't it. Okay. It seems to be that the stack is somehow incorrect, right? Because it shouldn't be that big, first of all. Chunk height. Let's just put a breakpoint here to get terrain type stack. Just go in there and see. Okay, so this is going to be a vector of terrain types, the stack. And then chunk height, why don't you show chunk height? Chunk height is defined in World Manager or in chunk? Chunk height, 10, even public. So we definitely can access that. So it should be 10. We have terrain type air all the way. And then if we well, let's just put another one here. Nope, not there. Let's go there and continue. And there we have the segmentation fault. Yeah, let's not worry about that too much and just ask our friend. What about this segmentation fault again? Please help. Does it matter in which order we have it? Then the whole thing is stupid, but I don't think so. I don't think so that it matters. Okay, let's actually get rid of these for now. And let's see what it says. Okay, yeah, let's do that this way then. And let's just say this is also 10. But in my eyes, that should be enough, right? H-E-I-G-H-T. H-E-I-G-H-T. Yeah, that wasn't it. Once again, segmentation errors are really bad. So let's go back to where we were. World chunk. So basically we get stuck here, right? It's the world manager created. Gets passed here. So let's just put another breakpoint here. Run that and see whether the world manager is assigned as soon as we hit this place here. Yeah, it seems to be missing here. Let's see, application, world manager. How do we create the world manager? Don't we have it in the application? Nope. Get the world manager here. Do we create that thing in the world? No. Do we want that in the world? Yeah. So then let's just pass that to the constructor of world and be happy with that, right? Probably we have world and world manager. Could be fine. So let's go back to world.h. Try again, once again. Sorry for that. Okay, so now we got debug errors. Okay, so in application I didn't pass the world manager, of course. But where do we have the world manager being created? And the world manager had this default creation thing, okay. And there we just have our thing here. So then now world manager has a chunk height. Let's just continue. let's just remove that breakpoint as it's annoying and start again and hope that it's not working. Okay, so it's fine that it's white right now, but as soon as it's generating mesh for chunk, it freaks out. So, okay, so now here we get some issues again. Try again. That's in cell draw. And in cell draw we don't have the chunk. No, we have the chunk, but is the world manager passed to the chunk? That's the big question. Okay, so chunk gets the world manager. World should basically work. Then let's go for new chunk and go to definition. It said initializing chunk, I think, was the last thing it said, right? No, that was before. Now the last thing it said, generating mesh for chunk at. Generating mesh. Where's the chunk? Okay, and the chunk.h has the vertices and the indices and so on, so that should work. So let's say std generating mesh for cell at calling cell draw at. That sounds good. And then let's go to the cell draw real quick. Maybe there's something we can see right away. Okay, we got the chunk, and then this is where it freaked out, right? Just add that breakpoint there. Okay, we got the chunk. The chunk has a world manager, but the world manager it has doesn't have the chunk height. Man, that's fucked up. Okay, then let's go back to where we create the chunk. Because basically there we need to pass it, right? It gets passed here. So in world, where we create the chunk, world manager, fine. In application, first have the world manager and then have the world. That should be fine as well. And then basically the issue comes up here in world draw, right? Let's check again, but I think so. Although we didn't have camera position and all that kind of stuff, so it's not in world draw, it's in this chunk draw and so on. But we didn't do camera or anything yet, yeah. Okay. let's just say we did this up here, and then chunk. Let's just say it's float, chunk size, chunk height. That's that. And then let's just put down chunk height here. Chunk height -1, I guess. No, that shouldn't be chunk height. The quad should be, well, it's chunk height -1. It's fine. So in theory, we could also just put a 9 there and be happy with that. But that would mean as soon as we change our chunk height in the chunk or in the world manager, then we would need to switch that here as well and so on. I don't like that. Let's just re-roll here and hope for the best. Okay, so now the segmentation fault is here. That's fine. Then that should mean that, what does it mean? Is the issue that we go through chunk and then world manager maybe? Is the chunk height in the world manager public? Important question. Yeah. And that's an int. Is that as expected? Yes, I would say so. Yeah, we can add the thing that he suggested, this return statement, but doesn't get us anywhere. We don't have the segmentation error then, fine, but we also don't get any further. Thing is, could also pass that as a variable here. Let's just try that. And just remove that here. Change world manager.h to accept also the chunk height. Remove that. And then everywhere where we use chunk height, we need to change that, of course. So basically in cell, but cell draw gets called with chunk. Let's just store it in chunk. That makes the most sense, right? Probably it should. Oh well, let's just and get chunk height. Perfect. Where's the issue? There. We need chunk height. Should be fine here. Messed up. Let's just run again. Okay, where did we forget to change that in class and cell? Cell.cpp. And let's just do chunk.chunk height or get chunk height. What's wrong with you? Yeah, that's old. Let's go again. remove that. Okay, so now it's working. It's pretty messed up, I would say, but it's working. Why is it so messed up though? I think some of our vertex positions, something is off here. Something is off. Okay, I'm just gonna ask our friend if he has any idea. So it works now, but the cells are all messed up. And we have triangles from one side to the other. Did we miss to tell it to use the texture, as there is still only red and green? Probably I should have added something else than cell here to the query, because I think we'll need to do, we'll need to push back that it uses the texture at some point, I think. But let's check his answer first. Check that you're setting the use texture uniform to true before drawing. That sounds good. Well, did we tell it to use counterclockwise thing? Don't we use CCW? Counterclock. What's the W for? Winding probably, so CCW is correct. Okay. So that's not it. But I don't think that we ever do this. Shader, set bool, use texture. Of course, we need to do it not generally like here, but for the world it's fine. So we could always just use, when we later on draw models after that, shader, use texture false in front of the model that we want to draw. So that wouldn't be an issue. And that looks a little better, but still kind of messed up. But I think okay, let's just turn off the in-world draw. We got these, where are those? Got chunks draw, and then in chunks, chunk draw, basically chunk draw, where is it? There. I think the issue is here in chunk draw. Let's just ask our friend. Yeah, that's something we didn't do at all. The GL, we didn't deal with that yet. So where's that? What is he talking about? Let's just search for that. Okay, so as I said yesterday, we need these positional attribute pointers in order to tell, basically, as I understand it, tell OpenGL where which thing is, basically. And we didn't update that. So we now need, of course, the position, the text chord, and the type ID. And we can remove all these calls for the console in the beginning, so we don't have to wait that long. That's looking a lot better already. Okay, well, also finds all of these uniforms and so on. Yeah, let's go to cell first of all. Comment that out. And then chunk draw. Run that again, so it should be a lot quicker, and then describe our problem in the meantime. So now we get, okay, still the green stripes. Can we see anything in here? Adding quads. Let's also remove that. That should be in chunk add quad, I guess. So that's just to clean up all of our console output, so we can actually find the stuff that we're looking for. Okay, and then let's describe our problem. So now we see green stripes from one end to the other. Could be as thick as a cell. I wanted to check one more thing in the meantime. And that is, let's see, what did I want to do? Yeah, let's just remove the debug lines for now. That was something I wanted to do. And chunk draw gets called from world draw, I guess. World draw, chunks, draw, let's do false, and see whether that's working again. Okay, so if these aren't the debug lines, then our terrain uses some cells. Let's count them real quick. 3, 6, I don't want to do that this way. Let's just say in our application, no, in our world that is, in the world.h, set world size to 10, let's do 2 instead. So 2 chunks per direction, 4 in total, and chunk size, chunk, should be 10 as well. Let's just do 2. Run that again. I think it's just not using the texture yet, and it's basically working. Okay, so we got 2 here, so probably there should have been 1 in the middle and 1 to the right, and then we have, maybe that's 4, could fit relatively good, I would say. Let's talk to our friend again. Okay, so I think it's just using color and not displaying all cells. Why is the color green? Not chunk.h, that's not useful for it. Let's go with chunk draw is more useful, I think. But debug lines is false now. So we could also just go ahead and just do this for now. So it should have no place in the whole application where it says to use green as a texture, as a color. And, well, our grass texture is of course also not that green. The big question is, does it not matter? Let's just try one other thing real quick. And that is cancel. Wait a second. In here, it should never do that. Right? Could we do it like this? So the color doesn't overwrite the texture. Let's just go ahead and try. Or did he GL bind vertex array? No, that's fine. Still was open. That's not gonna work. Can I merge? Why did it still work? I don't know. Don't think it's really debugged the whole thing and built new executable. Okay, then let's see. After all the creation, it says generating mesh for chunk 1, chunk 2, chunk 3, and chunk 4. And then let's go back to cell. And where was cell draw? I don't want a chunk height. Nope. Let's go back to chunk. It wasn't chunk. And then let's add that back in. And then for every chunk it should draw 4 cells, right? One, two, three, 4, 5. It's always 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0. Me, of course, I can't do that in the console. And I'll be right back. Okay, then let's go through all of that. Okay, let's just close that. There the world and chunks are being generated as expected. However, if you still only see debug colors red and green and not your textures, here the most likely issue is to check. One other thing that I wanted to check before we do anything is basically where do we tell which type it should be. That was in World Manager, right? So let's just say it's all dirt. What happens then? Is it still gonna be green? Then it's not even trying to get the texture. Well, it is, but it's not working. Okay, so it is working, but it's not using the full texture. That's interesting. And it's not working for all of the cells and all of the chunks. So that's also bad. Okay. Let's see. So it seems as if it uses the texture, but not as intended. It's a brownish, it's a greenish, but not uniform color texture. And texture in my window is all the same green. Where did we go wrong? So what I could think is that it basically takes our texture, which is definitely not the same as we just saw in the window, and it picks, I don't know, one spot and uses the color from there or something like that. I don't know. Okay, let's check that again, our fragment shader. If we were to say this is... So basically, this is different, right? No, that's what's happening here with text chord and layer.rgb, right? Vec3 text chord. Okay, so here it's just uses... Let's just try again without this +0.5. I don't think that's doing any good. Okay, then let's... it might be, as I said, so let's ask him... Where's the chat? There. Chat, open the window, please. Okay. Where do we get the texture coordinates? Text chords. Okay, so a fragment shader might use the texture coordinates from the vertex shader to look up a color in a texture and output that color for each pixel. Okay, so let's go back here. Text chord, our output, is getting assigned with text chord. That sounds reasonable. Then we get out our terrain type and we use, as well as our text chord, of course, and then that's it. And then in our fragment shader, we use that text chord exactly here. Vec3 is the text chord, that makes sense. And then the layer is whether it's grass, dirt, sand, or stone. And then we only use the RGB from that. So that should be fine. And So maybe it's just the text chord that we messed up somehow. Where do we do that though? The texture coordinates, probably where we call the add quad. So let him check that. What could be a thing here is... nope. Just thought about that. It might be a thing because we basically subtract half here and add a half here. But this is in terms of the texture. So this should be x0, this should be x100 basically. As far as I'm concerned at least. Okay, let's say this is bottom left. This is also bottom left, because it's minus in both ways. This is plus. So once again, as we had it yesterday, just gonna do a lovely drawing. So let's just put our triangle here, and then, well, basically we can say this is the 1, this is the 2, this is the 3, and this is the 4. And, well, if we want to have a look at our thing here, we're pushing them back in that order, so that should be fine. And then the triangles is 0, 1, 2. So, well, basically that's the 0, 1, 2, and 3 in computer language. So we go from 0 to 1 to 2. So this is the first triangle. And this is going to be the second from 1 or 0 to 2 to 3. 0. It's a little differently organized, which shouldn't matter, the order of these. But do we still go counterclock? 0, 2, 3, sounds good. 0, 2, 3, yeah. Okay, then let's check again here. What did you say? Some time ago, he told us to use wireframe instead. Wireframe instead? Trying to draw. Okay, so these are perfectly fine. Why is there only 2 times 4? Because there should be 2 times 2, so basically 4, right? We have a world size of 2, so that's 2 by 2. Wrong. Okay, and then per chunk we have 4 quads basically, because we have, let's just reduce that even further. Let's just go to chunk H and say we only have 1 cell per chunk. Man, I wanted to be way, way further than this today. Wild. Then it's working. That's not making any sense. Okay, so basically our vertex calculation is kind of messed up, I think. Let's do it the other way around. Let's say we have 2 cells per chunk, and then let's go to world and say we have 1 chunk per direction, so we basically only have 1 chunk. And 1 chunk should be 2 by 2, of course, not 2. So maybe we just messed up the chunk creation of the cells, first of all. It's a vector of cell, chunk size. That should be fine. Let me describe that to this guy real quick. So this is just a 1 by 2 then. So I tried with world size equals 1 and chunk size equals 2, and chunk is apparently only drawing 2 cells. Let's check one more time what it says in the console, basically. There's 4 draw calls. And well, so those calls were from in there. What are we doing here? We are checking x from 0 to basically 1, because chunk size is 2 and needs to be smaller. That's an issue here. Pretty sure about that. It's not good. But that still doesn't explain our texture issue. So I'm kind of keen on finding out about that as well. And that didn't fix the thing. Then let's get rid of all of these for a second. So that's in application. And then we have the camera position. That's fine. Where did we get this shader output? Probably from draw there. And then from chunk draw. Nope. No, this can't be it. so they all get created, and then for our one chunk we get 4 draw calls. So that doesn't make any sense. Chunk. So where do we draw again? Generate mesh. There we go from, yeah, this might be the issue as well. Actually pretty sure it is. Although, yeah, no, that makes sense basically. But it isn't. Okay. And it shouldn't actually change anything if I'm not mistaken. Although it is calling chunk or cell, whatever, cell draw 4 times. Is that correct? Where do we do that? In add quad. Vertices, but divided by 3, but we updated that to be 6. No, 5. Or basically 3 plus 2 plus 1 is 6. Yeah, okay. No, I want to debug, please. Such a stupid error. So stupid. And there we go. That works now. And then let's say we want to do world size. Go back to, let's say 4 so I can count, or let's do maybe 3 by 3. Let's do the same thing here. 3. So it's 3 by 3 by 3 by 3. So basically 9 chunks per world and 9 cells per chunk. So that's 3, 6, 9, 3, 6, 9. That's working great. Happy with that. Okay, then let's redo the draw call in chunk.draw. And let's just do this. Should be fine, I think. Yeah, then it couldn't work at all because it was just getting the values that we passed to the shader all confused. But we still don't have the texture really displayed. Let's ask a few more things. Do we need something else in our shaders to make the texture work? It's plain one color of brown, although the texture or let's check our fragment shader then one more time. I get the text board. Don't think that the order really matters here. And well, why do we only have the 2D array? Because it's in there. But maybe, do I need to put that in? I think it should be fine, but in a sampler 2D, if I have a sampler 2D array, or can I use that straight away? Okay, so that shouldn't be the issue. And in here everything looks fine to me. That's alright. The uniforms get set. Okay, that's interesting. So in stbi load, where do we use that again? Up here, right? Just gonna say 4 instead of 0. That's interesting. That might be a thing. So if the texture is not getting loaded correctly, because the last time I did that is first of all a bit back, and also I used different textures that I didn't create but download. So one thing I could do is just try one of these textures real quick. So if we look at our own texture, it's definitely not plain brown, and this dirt texture we have here isn't either. So let's go to application. Sorry, to simple shader. Neither, then it's world. Get confused a little here. And let's remove that. Okay, that's not even working. Because, the texture is different size. Cancel. Remove that. Then we're just gonna go there again. Quickly gonna do this dirt. Man, can't we also just say how much we want? That's so annoying. Let's just do that with paint then. And let's save that. I don't know. Okay, then let's see. We didn't close it once again. Okay, so it's definitely an issue with our program and not an issue with our texture, I would say. Because I know that this texture basically works. So if we were to run an older version, a very old version, we can see that it's working with these textures that we have there. Just gonna take a little while. And as you can see here, it's basically working. Okay, we don't use that stone texture there that we had up a second ago, but basically these textures are all the same and it's working. So, I don't know. It's kind of messed up a little. But I don't really want to end that here with messed up texture thing. Okay. Okay, let's check that. is that probably application. There we're gonna draw. Let's go inside there. We have the texture 0. We have the texture 2D array and the texture texture array ID. Terrain texture ID. Terrain texture array ID should be fine. Set the uniform in your shader to use the correct unit. I think that's also happening. Let's just use search for that. I think it's in simple shader. Nope, it's probably where we basically use that, so that might be an application, right? Nope. Is it in world then? Okay, and we do shader ID, terrain textures. That might be a thing, because these names need to match the names in our shader. So let's use our normal texture again that we created ourselves. Nope, still not working. But let's have a look. This is terrain textures, and in our shaders I think we need to match that, but we do, so it shouldn't be it. So that was where? In world? On simple shader. Nope, I think in application. Nope. In world. Why do we only clear the vertices though? Don't we need to do that for other stuff as well? Nope, we don't. Do we call the generate mesh stuff for each chunk in world? No, we only call chunks.draw and draw, and in generate meshes we call chunks generate mesh, and in world and up in application do we ever call to generate the meshes? I think so. Yeah, up here, but let's leave that there, but also put it here maybe. Basically it needs might need to be updated. Currently not, but later on. Doesn't matter. I'm pretty sure it's a super stupid thing. We got the use texture true. We don't set any other things here. Okay, let's just add one last time. Are these images all the same size? Let's check them. 400 by 400, 400 by 400, 400 by 400. And that's not the texture we're talking about. Okay. Just help me find this error, please. And then we're gonna add shader. We're gonna add the vertex. And we're gonna add the fragment. We do that, yes. I think we do that somewhere, but I don't mind doing that. I think we checked that already. That's so fucking stupid, if that's correct. Where are my fragments? Text chord is upper case. So let's change that to lowercase. And in the vertex, it is indeed lowercase. So, damn. Well, probably not as efficient as it could be to do stuff like this live on stream. Especially finding errors is way easier, I think, if you're only focusing on that. Okay, so the texture isn't really great, but it's fine. Okay, and then I think all the height differences and so on we're gonna tackle probably tomorrow, because I'm kind of exhausted right now, as that was quite a bummer to look for that error all the time. Hopefully those who are still around here enjoyed, and well, see you guys next time. Have a good one and stay safe. Have a great evening. Bye bye.